The Shadow of Sundown Towns. Chapter 1. Welcome to Sycamore Falls. In the summer of 1963, the Carter family arrived in Sycamore Falls with hopeful hearts and a beat-up station wagon. James Carter, a high school history teacher, had accepted a job at the local school. His wife Lena, a nurse, had secured part-time work at the small clinic near Main Street. With their two children, Marcus, age 12, and Emily, age 9, they moved into a modest home on a maple-lined avenue that looked like it belonged in a postcard. The town was clean, quiet, almost too quiet. The neighbors came by the first day, not with casseroles or smiles, but with curiosity. A few introduced themselves stiffly, glancing often at the children. Most only watched from behind screened doors. Lena noticed how quickly conversations ended when she stepped onto the porch. That evening, while Marcus played catch in the yard, a boy from across the street joined in. They laughed until the sun began to dip below the rooftops. Suddenly, the boy dropped the ball, muttered, "Gotta go," and sprinted home. Moments later, windows shut, porch lights flicked off. Confused, Marcus lingered on the lawn. That's when Mr. Talbert, their neighbor, appeared at the edge of his driveway. He looked nervous. "Evening," he said. "Just friendly advice. You'll want to be indoors before sundown. That's how things work here. Safer that way." James raised an eyebrow. "Safer from what?" Talbot didn't answer. He just tipped his hat and walked back inside. As darkness crept in, Lena locked the doors and pulled the curtains. Inside, the family sat in silence, each wrestling with unspoken questions. Emily clutched her doll a little tighter. Marcus asked if the boy would play again tomorrow. James just stared out the window. Sycamore Falls was picture perfect. But something in the picture wasn't right. And as night swallowed the town whole, the Carters began to realize that beneath the beauty, something was watching. And waiting. Chapter 2. Signs at Sunset. The days passed slowly in Sycamore Falls, and the Carters tried to blend in. James focused on preparing for the school year, Lena immersed herself in the clinic's quiet routines, and the kids explored their new town on bikes and foot. But the sense of being watched never faded. It started small. A local diner, friendly enough during the day, stopped serving them if they walked in after 6 p.m. Kitchens closed, the waitress would say, even as others were still being seated. The park, always bustling during daylight, emptied within minutes when Lena sat on a bench with Emily. Mothers pulled their children away. Older folks turned their backs. One afternoon, Marcus and Emily found a small trail that led to an old clearing behind the town square. It looked like it had once been a gathering place. An overgrown gazebo, rusted swings, broken light posts. At its center stood a crumbling stone marker. Most of the words were worn away by time, but one phrase remained, just barely visible: "Not after dark." When James brought it up casually with the town sheriff, an older man named Dobson, the sheriff chuckled, tapping his badge like a joke. "That's just some silly legend," he said. "You know how these old places are, full of ghost stories and superstitions." But the tone in his voice said otherwise. That night, the Carters noticed something chilling. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, people began turning on porch lights, not to welcome the evening, but to signal something. A code. A warning. One house, then another, like a row of matches igniting one by one. James watched through the blinds, arms crossed, breath held. Lena didn't say a word. The kids felt it too. Something unseen tightening around them, something old and patient. And when the street lamps finally flickered on, not a soul remained outside but them. A restaurant that won't serve them after 6 p.m., a park that clears out when they arrive, a hidden plaque with faded letters reading, "Not after dark." When they ask the sheriff, he chuckles and says, "That's just an old joke." But the unease grows. as they realize the town is built on more than tradition. It's built on fear. Chapter 3, The House at the Edge of Town. The real estate agent called it a gem, a Victorian-era home with tall windows, ornate trim, and a wraparound porch. "You're lucky," she said. "These don't come up often." It was located on the edge of Sycamore Falls, where the streetlights faded and the roads narrowed into dirt paths. The Carters moved in with cautious hope. The house looked grand but wary, its wood faded by sun and rain. Ivy crept along one side like a secret trying to escape. Inside, the house was eerily still. The furniture from the previous owners was left behind, covered in sheets, but too recently placed to be forgotten. Plates remained in the cabinets. Toys lay in a corner of one room, untouched, as if waiting for a child who would never return. In Emily's closet, they found a drawing pinned to the wall. It showed people standing outside a house, engulfed in red flames, a large figure looming in the background beneath a blood-colored sky. The style was crude, childlike. But it unsettled them all. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees, the creaks of the floorboards turned into something more deliberate. Marcus swore he heard footsteps in the hallway. Lena felt a cold draft in a room with no windows open, and James, returning from the kitchen, paused on the stairs when he thought he saw movement in the dark. They chalked it up to settling, to nerves, to an old house making old house sounds. But deep down, they all knew the house had stories, and it had not forgotten them. But the previous owners left abruptly. Their belongings remain half-packed, and a closet holds a child's drawing. People standing outside a burning house under a red sky. That night, footsteps echo in the hallways. Chapter 4. A Name. Not spoken. Emily had always been curious. But curiosity became something else the day she stood in the school hallway, flipping through a dusty yearbook from 1962. Page after page showed smiling faces, cheerleaders, football players, prom queens, but none of them looked like her. No black students, no families she recognized. She flipped to 1961, then 1960, nothing. She asked her teacher, Mrs. Wilkins, about it after class. The woman paused, looking over her glasses with a softness that felt like sadness. She glanced at the closed door before leaning closer. "There's a name," she whispered. "Elijah Carter. Don't ask, just don't." Emily wrote it down anyway. That evening, she brought it up at dinner. Her father's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, voice low. "Someone from school," she replied. Her parents exchanged a look. Not fear, not anger, something else. Grief. Later that night, Emily couldn't sleep. She slipped into the hallway and pulled an old town history book from the living room shelf. Flipping through the index, she found no mention of Elijah Carter. She searched the town's public records at the library. Nothing. No birth record, no census entry, no obituary. It was as if he never existed. But he had to. Someone remembered him, Mrs. Wilkins, and if there was one memory, there had to be more. Emily made it her mission to find them. She began asking quiet questions. At the grocery store, at church, in the clinic waiting room, most people denied knowing the name. Some simply walked away. Still, she searched. She looked for clues in the margins and the blank spaces of books, in whispers passed in hallways. She began keeping a notebook, a journal of absence. Elijah Carter was more than a name. He was a shadow in the corner of every room, a silence that shouted louder than words. And Emily was done being quiet. No one remembers who founded it. No black families appear in yearbooks older than 1970. A school teacher nervously pulls Emily, the family's daughter, aside and whispers a name, Elijah Carter. Don't ask. Just don't. Emily writes it down. She begins digging. Chapter 5. The Map with Missing Roads. It was on a rainy afternoon that Emily and her new friend Noah found themselves tucked away in the back room of the town library, thumbing through old planning records and dusty maps. What started as a class assignment had turned into something much deeper. Emily was looking for traces of someone the town had tried to forget. But what she found instead were roads that had vanished. One of the maps, dated 1935, showed a series of streets branching off the south side of town. There were names: Lincoln Drive, Maple Row, Evergreen Terrace. Small clusters of homes dotted each road, marked with little squares. But when they compared it to the modern map from 1965, those streets were gone. Not renamed, erased. Emily squinted closer. These were neighborhoods, she whispered. Whole streets, whole families. They dug further, finding photographs, yellowed with age, snapshots of houses, children playing, church gatherings. In the margins were handwritten notes. Demolished 1954, cleared for development, rezoned. But there were no new buildings on the land. It was just empty, grass, silence. Noah uncovered a council meeting transcript from the early 950s. It discussed revitalizing the town's image and consolidating resources. There was coded language, talk of undesirable areas and low-come sections, but Emily knew what it meant. These were black neighborhoods, and they had been wiped off the map. When she asked the current librarian about those roads, the woman hesitated, then said, "Oh, those places were never really built, just plans that never came through." But the photos told a different story. The letters, the addresses, the families. That night, Emily traced the map in her notebook, recreating the erased streets by hand. It wasn't just about roads. It was about memory, about existence, about the way history can be paved over until only a few brave voices remember the way back. Roads that used to connect black communities are gone, erased with time and expansion. Emily and her friend uncover photos of demolished homes and notices citing redevelopment. There were lives here before. But who were they? Chapter 6. Beneath the church floorboards. It was supposed to be a simple service project. Emily and a few others from her youth group were helping clean out the old First Hope Baptist Church, which had stood in Sycamore Falls for nearly a century. The white clapboard exterior peeled in places, and inside, dust danced in the shafts of morning light that slipped through stained glass windows. As the group swept, mopped, and dusted, Emily lingered near the pulpit. Something about the creaking wood beneath her feet made her pause. She tapped the boards gently and noticed a hollow echo. One plank, slightly raised at the edge, caught her eye. Carefully, she pried it up. Beneath it was a hidden compartment, dusty but intact. Inside, she found a metal box wrapped in old cloth. She glanced around. No one had noticed. Heart pounding, she opened it. The box contained faded photographs, handwritten letters, and a collection of neatly folded protest signs. One photograph stopped her cold. A black pastor standing alone on the church steps, facing a group of angry white townspeople. Another letter, written in shaky cursive, recounted nights of prayer during the civil rights movement, threats from the sheriff, and a warning they want to erase us. What God sees. Emily sat on the floor and read until her knees ached. The letters were from people who had lived, loved, and resisted here, whose stories had never made it into any town archive. The signs carried messages like, "Justice now, and let us be." One, barely legible, simply said, "We belong." When the youth pastor came by, she quickly closed the box. Something in her told her it wasn't time to share it yet, not until she understood what it meant. That night, she showed the contents to her parents. James stared at the photos, his jaw clenched. Lena wiped away tears. "This church wasn't just a place of worship," she said softly. "It was a battleground and a home." Emily knew then the past wasn't gone, it was just buried. And sometimes all it took was a lifted floorboard to bring the truth back into the light. Hidden below are handwritten letters, protest signs, and a photograph of a black pastor standing alone before a white mob. The church was once a sanctuary, but also a battlefield. The town has tried to bury its past, literally. Chapter 7. The Girl Who Asked Why. Emily had never been one to cause trouble. She turned in her assignments, helped her classmates, and rarely raised her hand unless she was certain of the answer. But something changed after she uncovered the church's hidden box. Her questions grew bolder, her voice steadier. When her 8th grade history teacher assigned a project titled Our Town's Legacy, most students chose safe topics: founding families, architecture, famous festivals. Emily chose something different. Her topic, the history we don't talk about. She stood in front of the class with photographs of the erased streets, copies of the yearbooks with missing students, and a carefully typed speech. She didn't accuse anyone, she asked questions. Why don't we talk about Elijah Carter? Why did black neighborhoods disappear? Why are there no plaques, no memorials, no pages in our textbooks? The room was silent. Mrs. Green, the teacher, watched with a conflicted expression. Some students looked down, a few whispered behind their hands. Later that day, Emily found a note in her locker: "Stop asking, stay quiet." It was written in shaky, anonymous handwriting. At home, she told her parents. James hugged her tightly. Lena kissed her forehead and said, "Good trouble, baby." Just like John Lewis said, "You're making good trouble." But not everyone agreed. Some parents called the school. A member of the school board said she was being divisive. Her principal asked if she might consider choosing another topic for the town history night. Emily's refused. She had found her courage, and she wasn't giving it back. And though she felt the stares in the hallway and heard the whispers, she also noticed something else. 2 classmates slipped her notes that simply said, "Thank you." One boy asked her for a copy of her sources. Even Mrs. Green, the teacher who said nothing during the presentation, left a sticky note on her folder: "You were brave." Emily knew change wouldn't come all at once, but it had to start somewhere, and maybe it started with a girl who asked why. Her teacher is supportive, quietly, but tension grows. She's called disrespectful by some parents. Notes are left in her locker: "Stop asking, stay quiet." But she refuses. Her voice becomes a spark. Chapter 8. The Man Who Never Left. The legend of Elijah Carter lingered like a ghost in Sycamore Falls. Some said he vanished in the 1950s. Others claimed he died in a fire. A few believed he never existed at all. But Emily was beginning to learn that every myth hides a truth, and she was determined to find his. She followed the breadcrumbs: a name scribbled in a library margin, a story shared by a retired mailman, an address with no house. Finally, she came upon a rough path just outside the town border, leading deep into the woods. After an hour of walking beneath tangled branches and birdsong, she found it: a weathered cabin tucked in a clearing that sunlight barely touched. Smoke rose from a chimney. Someone was inside. Elijah Carter was not a ghost. He was very real. An old man with tired eyes, dark skin weathered by sun and sorrow, and a voice that sounded like gravel and wind. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "I figured someone would come looking someday," he said, gesturing for her to sit. His cabin was a time capsule, stacks of journals filled with clippings, maps, and memories, black and white photos of rallies, families, funerals. One wall was covered in names written in charcoal, slowly, carefully, over decades. He told her everything. The night his family's house was burned, the town's law that allowed no black families to remain past sundown, the way his father's business was shuttered, their pastor threatened, their school closed. He told her how the sheriff warned him to leave, but he refused. Someone had to remember, he said. Someone had to stay. Emily listened, tears in her eyes, her notebook forgotten in her lap. When she asked him why he never came back into town, he looked at her with a quiet pain. "Because I'm still not welcome," he said. "But you might be the one who makes them see." She left the cabin that evening changed. Elijah wasn't just a story, he was a living witness. And now that she had heard his truth, she carried it with her like a torch through the long shadow of the town that tried to forget him. Elijah Carter. Some say he's a ghost, others say he's dangerous. Emily finds him living in a cabin surrounded by journals, photos, and pain. He tells her the truth about the night he watched his family's house burn, about the law that protected no one, and about why he stayed to remember. Chapter 9. The Parade That Never Crossed the Bridge. Every year, Sycamore Falls came alive with celebration for Founders Day. Banners fluttered from lampposts, brass bands warmed up on Main Street, and townsfolk lined the sidewalks with folding chairs and red, white, and blue coolers. The highlight of the event was always the parade, a long, winding procession of floats, scouts, and school groups that marched proudly through town and always stopped at Sycamore Bridge. Emily had watched the parade before, but now, after everything she'd learned, that ending felt suspicious. Why did it always stop at the bridge? Why didn't it ever continue across? She brought it up to the mayor during a school tour. He smiled and replied, "Tradition. The route's been the same for decades." Unsatisfied, Emily returned to the library. She and Noah dug through old newspapers and black and white photographs until they found what they weren't supposed to see. A front-page photo from the 1950s. A high school band, all black students, standing at the Sycamore Bridge, instruments down, surrounded by police. The headline read, "Parade Disruption Prevented." Another article mentioned a town ordinance passed quietly in the years that followed, restricting public gatherings beyond the bridge for safety reasons. Emily's stomach twisted. The tradition wasn't about celebration, it was about exclusion. The bridge had become a line in the sand, crossable for some, forbidden for others. She brought the photo to her teacher, who froze. "Where did you find this?" she asked. Emily answered, "Where it was hidden." At the next town council meeting, Emily stood up and asked again in front of everyone, "Why don't we cross the bridge?" This time, the silence was louder than any parade. But not everyone stayed quiet. An older man from the audience stood and said, "I remember that day. I was there. I didn't do anything, and I've regretted it every year since." It was a small crack in a long-held silence, but Emily knew cracks let in light. And sometimes they even lead to bridges being crossed for real. Emily asks why, and the mayor deflects. Then she finds photos from the 1950s. A black marching band stopped at that very bridge, turned away by police. The tradition wasn't about celebration, it was about exclusion. Chapter 10. Curtains That Never Open. Emily had always known that people in Sycamore Falls liked their privacy, but after her appearance at the town council meeting, she began to see it differently. It wasn't privacy, it was fear disguised as tradition. She noticed it in the way front porches were always swept but never sat on, in the way curtains remained drawn even during sunny afternoons, in the way voices hushed when her family walked past. She decided to go door to door with Noah. They weren't asking for signatures or donations, just stories. They knocked politely, asked softly. Some people stared at them through blinds and never opened the door. Others cracked the door just wide enough to say, "No thank you," before closing it gently. One house, faded yellow, overgrown garden, let them in. An elderly woman named Mrs. Laney greeted them. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were sharp. She poured tea and motioned to the dusty photo albums on the table. "You're brave," she told Emily. "Braver than we were allowed to be." She flipped through the album and pointed to a black and white photo. A man in a suit stood next to a little girl in braids. "My neighbor, Mr. Jasper. He was kind. He helped fix everyone's radios. One night men came, took him from his porch. We never saw him again." Her voice cracked. "My father told me to forget it, that we had to keep our heads down, but I never forgot. And now, you're helping others remember." Emily asked if she could scan the photo. Mrs. Laney nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Tell him he was here," she said, "that he mattered." As Emily left the house, she looked back. This time, the curtain in the front window was open. It was just one window, but it was enough to let in the light. Some know the truth but are afraid. Others pretend not to. Emily and her friends go door to door, asking for stories. Most stay silent, but an elderly woman lets them in. She shares tear-streaked memories of watching a neighbor dragged away in the dark, never seen again. Chapter 11. A letter from 1947. It was Noah who suggested they check the attic of the town hall. After everything they had uncovered, the maps, the church box, the parade photos, they knew there had to be more hidden in the very bones of Sycamore Falls. The attic wasn't open to the public, but the elderly janitor, Mr. Holbrook, gave them a nod and a wink. "Be careful," he said. "Some ghosts up there don't like to be disturbed." Dust hung thick in the air as they climbed the narrow staircase. Boxes stacked to the ceiling lined the attic, many of them untouched for decades. Faded labels read "Correspondence," "Ordinances," "General Inquiries." Emily opened a box labeled Miss 1940S. Inside was a manila folder with a brittle letter dated July 3, 1947. It was typed on official Department of Justice letterhead. Her hands trembled as she read. To Mayor Thomas W. Harland of Sycamore Falls. "We are initiating an inquiry into reports regarding local curfews that appear to specifically and unlawfully target Negro citizens. Such policies, whether officially legislated or informally enforced, violate constitutional protections." Attached was a carbon-copied response. "To whom it may concern, there are no black residents in Sycamore Falls after dark. Therefore, there are no curfews, no discrimination, and no issues." The signature was Mayor Harland's. Emily stared at the page, her breath caught between anger and disbelief. "They didn't deny it," she whispered. "They confirmed it and called it peace." At the bottom of the folder were internal memos, notes between council members laughing off the federal concern, mocking the idea that anyone would challenge their way of life. One note read, "Tell Washington, we're just a quiet town with quiet rules." She photocopied everything. That night she and Noah printed copies and pasted them on the bulletin board at school, slid them under office doors, left them in library books. It wasn't just about history anymore. It was about accountability, about tearing down not just the myth but the lie. It's from a government official warning the mayor about federal investigations into Sycamore Falls' unofficial curfews. The mayor responded, "There are no black residents after dark. There are no issues." Chapter 12. The Sheriff's List. The cabin was quiet except for the ticking of a worn clock on the wall and the slow crackle of a fire in the stove. Emily sat with Elijah, flipping through one of his oldest journals. when he suddenly stood and disappeared into a side room. When he returned, he held a thin, battered logbook with a broken clasp. "This," he said, laying it on the table, "was given to me by someone who risked their job to keep it from being destroyed." The cover was marked Sheriff's Records, 1939 to 1969. Inside, handwritten names stretched down the pages, organized by year. Notes scribbled beside them included phrases like "left voluntarily," "relocated to unknown," and "no record." But Elijah traced his finger over a column. "These weren't relocations," he said. "These were erased." Emily's breath caught. The names were all black families, dozens of them. Next to each, the same note appeared again and again. "Departed after sunset warning." She counted them, over 50 families, each with a date. The entries stopped abruptly in 1969. "Elijah," she whispered, "why did they stop keeping the list?" He closed the book gently. "Because after 69, there was no one left to record, and they figured no one else would dare come back." Emily thought of her own family, their arrival, the stairs, the signs. "We weren't the first," she said. "We were just the first who stayed." She took photos of every page. Back at home, she and Noah began cross-referencing the names with census records and school rosters. Most had been wiped clean, but a few had descendants still in neighboring towns. Some had never known their parents had tried to settle in Sycamore Falls. The sheriff's list wasn't just evidence. It was a graveyard of silenced stories. And now Emily was determined to speak every name aloud. Chapter 13. When the lights came on. The idea came to Emily late one night as she stared at the list of names from the sheriff's log, each entry haunting her like a whispered prayer. She didn't want to keep them hidden in dusty folders. She wanted the town to see them, say them, honor them. With the help of Noah and her parents, Emily organized a vigil. They printed each name on a white card and gathered candles, one for every family. The town square was chosen for its symbolism, the heart of Sycamore Falls, once a stage for celebration, now a place to confront the truth. Word spread. Some people called it unnecessary. A few claimed it would only stir up trouble, but others supported the idea. Quietly, carefully, the community began to take notice. On the night of the vigil, the air was still and heavy. Rows of candles lined the steps of the town hall, flickering gently against the evening breeze. A microphone crackled as Emily stepped forward. She didn't make a speech. Instead, she read the names, one by one, slowly. Thomas and Miriam Young, 1943. Isaiah Coleman and family, 1947. Ruth Jefferson, 1951. With each name, a candle was lit. Her voice never wavered. Some townspeople watched from across the street. Some turned away, but others stepped forward, joining the circle. The mayor arrived late and stood at the edge of the crowd, silent. An older woman approached Emily after the final name. Her hands shook as she lit a candle. "My grandfather was one of them," she whispered. "I never knew his name was on the list." The crowd did erupt into applause. There was no dramatic moment, just light and silence. But for the first time, it wasn't the kind of silence used to hide something. It was the kind that comes from reverence. That night, the street lamps stayed on longer than usual. Not one house turned off its porch light, and for the first time, the lights of Sycamore Falls illuminated more than its streets. They illuminated its history. They light candles and read the names from the list. Some residents shout and leave, but others stay. A few joined, and as the candles flicker in the darkness, for the first time, the town begins to see itself. Chapter 14. The night the silence broke. It began with a letter, just a single envelope, slipped into Emily's mailbox late at night, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. I was there when Elijah's house was burned. I didn't light the match, but I didn't stop it either. I still hear the screams. The signature was a single initial, R. The next day, more letters appeared, not just at Emily's house, but at the church, at the library, even taped to the door of the mayor's office. All unsigned, all confessions. One read, "My father sat on the town council. He voted to remove the colored families. He told us it was for order. I believed him. I'm sorry." Another, "I kept records. I shredded them. I regret it." Each letter peeled back a layer of the town's silence. For so long the people of Sycamore Falls had hidden behind the comfort of forgetfulness, but now the dam had cracked. Emily collected them, scanned them, shared them with her classmates and parents. The local newspaper refused to print them, so she created a bulletin board downtown titled Voices Unburied. Each morning, more letters were pinned there by anonymous hands. Some residents responded with anger. "Let it go," they said. "You're tearing this town apart." But others whispered, "Thank you." One woman held Emily's hand and said, "I've been waiting 60 years for someone like you." At a special town meeting, Emily read 5 of the letters aloud. The crowd sat in uneasy stillness. When she finished, the mayor stepped forward, not with a rebuttal, but with a letter of his own. He had found it in his grandfather's belongings. It was a request to enforce the sundown policy. Signed by 5 prominent citizens whose names now adorned street signs and buildings. "Maybe," the mayor said, "it's time we choose different names to honor." And so, that night, the silence broke not with shouting or protest, but with something more lasting. Truth laid bare, and the promise of change no longer whispered but spoken aloud. One by one, secrets emerge, betrayals, guilt, and quiet acts of resistance. The silence that protected the town begins to crack under the weight of truth. Chapter 15. We stayed after sundown. It had been a year since the Carters arrived in Sycamore Falls. A year of questions, of truth-telling, of courage. The shadows that once clung to the sidewalks and whispered from behind shutters were beginning to recede. Change had come slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. On the evening of their anniversary in the town, Emily stood by the front door, watching the sky turn gold and crimson. "Are you ready?" her mother asked softly. Emily nodded. "Let's go." They stepped out as a family. James in his pressed shirt, Lena in a blue dress, Marcus with a baseball cap tucked under his arm. Emily held a candle, unlit but waiting. As they reached the town square, a few familiar faces appeared. Noah and his parents, Mrs. Laney, even Mrs. Green from school. Then others came, people who had once looked away, people who had once stayed silent. There were no speeches, no signs, just people gathering. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, no one moved indoors. Instead, porch lights flicked on, candles were lit, a quiet hum of unity settled over the square. The mayor arrived and handed Emily a small box. Inside was a plaque, in memory of those erased, in honor of those who remembered. Together, they installed it on the base of the old gazebo, where Emily had once found the worn "Not After Dark" marker. Now, a new message stood in its place. Children played on the grass nearby. A group of teenagers played music. An older man stood beside Elijah Carter, who had finally returned, leaning on his cane. People greeted him, not with fear, but with respect. Emily looked around and whispered, "We stayed after sundown." Her father nodded, voice thick with emotion, and so did they. As night settled over Sycamore Falls, it wasn't the kind of darkness that hid things. It was the kind of darkness where healing begins. And this time no one turned away. This time they are not alone. Dozens joined them. The sun sets, no one hurries inside. Porch lights turn on instead of off. No signs, no warnings, just presence, just change, and the long shadow finally begins to lift.